Today we're going to look at tutorial 4, graphic design with CSS. Some of the objectives for this chapter include creating a figure box, adding a background image, add a border to an element, creating rounded borders, create a graphic border, create a text shadow, box shadow, create linear and radial gradients, set the opacity of an element, apply 2D and 3D transformations, apply a CSS filter, and then create an image map. All right, so we create figure boxes. We use the figure and the fig caption element. These are used by HTML5 to introduce structural elements. The fig caption element is optional, and it can be placed directly before or after the figure box content. So we'll see an example of the syntax for the figure and the fig caption. So we have our figure, and then the content. So this is, say, our image, and then the fig caption, and the caption text. So that's what we want to show up there. Content is the content that's going to appear in the figure box, and the caption text is the description text. So we can see how this will be written out here. So we have our open and close figure tags. Inside here, this is the content. Okay, so we have our image located here. Then we got our alt text for that. Then the caption down here is left to right, and then these people's names, and then fig caption. Example of this code here. So we've got the picture and we got the information there. So we see an example of a fig caption. Look at the source. We see here we got our fig, and then it's got an ID set to this figure. This is the content. The fig caption is this person's name, 2007 photo, which we see here. Okay, so that's what the fig caption does. It will add this to the image. All right, the figure element is used to mark a page content that should stand apart from the main content. In this case, we want the figure, and we want that caption. So we want that text into the image. We could use images as backgrounds. It's supported by CSS, and we use the following. We use the background dash image and then the style, where we set the background image set to the URL. The URL is going to specify the name and location of the background image. We have some options here. You can tile a background. Tiling is the process of repeating the image on both vertically and horizontally until the background is filled. We can set this by doing the background repeat style and the background repeat type. And the type is going to be what is going to be repeated, whether it's going to be repeated on the X axis, the Y axis, rounded, or space. We'll take a look at this here. We see some tiled images. This will be saved as the background. If this is, let me see if they give you an example of this. All right, so the tiled images. Um, and when we attach a background image, we use the background dash attachment. Uh, when we do this, it's going to be attached to the element that scrolls with the element. So we can change this with the background attachment type. Type is going to be either scroll, which is the default, fixed, or local. So when we look at the scroll, it's going to set the background to scroll with the element content. Fixed is going to create the background that stays in place. The element content is scrolled. And local allows the element background to scroll along with the content within the box. Another thing to look at for background images is watermarks. These are translucent graphics displayed behind the content. They can be created using fixed backgrounds. And this is something that's often going to be used to indicate that some type of material is copyrighted. You may have seen watermarks on Google Images. When you're searching for image, you'll see some type of text, maybe says do not copy, do not print, those type of things. Those are your watermarks. All right, so when you set the background image, by default, it's going to be placed in the element's top left corner. Now you can change that using the background position, horizontal, vertical. And the horizontal vertical is going to provide the coordinates of an image within the element's background. You got some keywords you can use here to position a background image. One second, let me turn my phone down. All right, so you can use these keywords to position a background image. You can use left, center, right. Those are used to position the background horizontally, and the top, center, bottom are going to be used to position it vertically. And this is something you only use for non-tiled images. Sometimes you'll have an element's background. It's going to extend only through the padding space, excluded in the border space. So you can change this using the background clip type. And the type you can use here is you can use content box, which extends the background only through the element's content. Padding box will extend it through the padding space, or border box will extend it through the border space. And those will take place of the word type here. All right, so by default, the size of the background image is going to equal the size stored of its image file. You can change the width and height. With the background size, width and height is going to be specified in either in pixels or using keywords such as auto, cover, or contain. So we'll take a look at this in a second here. We see here that the image, we got our background size is 200 to 300 pixels. Okay, so that puts this image covering just this area. Or we use the keyword cover. So now the image is going to be resized. It's going to be resized to fill that element. Notice though that when it fills it, it does clip. It does crop out part of the image. For example, he's right here in the main image, so all of this stuff, these people here are cut out of the image. Now, the background size contained, this is where the image is going to be resized, so it's contained with the element. Part of the background is left uncovered. You can also use you got different background options, and you can have them organized using the following properties. That's background, color, URL. Color is going to be the background color. URL is going to be the source of the background image. Position, so the image's position. Size is going to set the image's size. Repeat sets the tiling of the image. Attachment is going to specify whether the image scrolls where the content is fixed or where the content area is fixed. Origin defines how the positions are measured on the background. Clip specifies the extent over which the background is spread. You can also add multiple backgrounds to a single element, and you do this by a comma separated list. So we'll set the background, and in this case, we got background 1, background 2. So we look at the code here. We've got a background. We use commas to separate these. The second background is images. It's going to be at the lower left corner of the article. Content with no tiling and the width of 15%. The third one is going to be at the scale to cover all the padding box of the article without repeating. And you even have a color in here. It's going to have gray color as a background. Okay, so this is going to be used here if the browser doesn't support background images. Now to set up background with color, you got several different styles you can use to set the border width and color of the border. So you see the border size, border side width. So here, this allows you to set the thickness of the border. The side is going to be either top right, bottom or left. So you say, border top, border left, so forth. And width is going to be the width of the border. So we see here we got border left set to 1 pixel solid. RGB is set to 51, 51, 51. Same for the right, border right. So it's going to add a 1 pixel solid gray border to the left and right edges of the page body. When it just says down here the border, it adds a 4 pixel double medium green border. So this is the green colors to the aside element. So you can use the border side style. Okay, so once again, it's border left, and then the properties. All right, to create rounded corners, you can round all 4 of your corners. You apply the properties of the border radius, top left, top right, bottom left. Now with this, the top left, top right, bottom left are going to be the individual corners. So we see here we got 20 pixels with 20 pixels, 60 to 60 in the top right, 100 by 100, and then 140 by 140 in the bottom left. So we see our border radius at 20 pixels, 60 pixels, 100 pixels, 140. So an example of this, we set our border radius to 30 pixels. So that's going to be 30 all the way around. So this image is going to be rounded off by 30 pixels on all directions. You can apply a border image. Border image is a border based on a graphic image. Graphics image is going to be sliced in 9 sections. So it represents the 4 corners, the 4 sides, and the interior piece. Content is going to appear of the object is going to appear in the interior piece, and that piece is going to be discarded. Okay. The 4 corners become the corners of the border. The 4 sides are going to be either stretched or tiled to fill in the border's top, right, bottom, and left sides. When we see this, border image is going to be applied using this property, border image. URL is going to be the source of the graphic. Slice is going to indicate the width or height of the slice. And that's going to be used to create the sides and the corners. And repeat is going to indicate whether it's going to be stretched or tiled to cover the 4 sides. So it's going to have the options here for repeat. It's either going to stretch, which is going to, slices are going to stretch to fill each side, or repeat is they're going to be tiled. Round is when the slices are tiled to fit each side. If they do not fill the sides with the integer number of tiles, The slices are rescaled until they do. Space is when the slices are tiled to fit each side. Well, if they don't fill the sides with an integer number of tiles, extra space is distributed around the tiles. So let's see an example of this. As we have our image, okay, so this right here is going to be discarded because this is where this guy's picture is going to go. Obviously, this graphic here is not wide enough or long enough to fit this image. All right, so we'll see if it cut into different slices. When this is put in, you'll see that it is finally stretched out so that it does fit around the image. All right, a text shadow. It's a shadow that can be added to text on the page. And what it does, it gives the text a visual impact. Okay, so you set this property by using the text as shadow, color, offset X, offset Y, blur. The color is the shadow color. Offset X and Y are the distance of the shadow from the text in horizontal and vertical different directions. And the blur creates a blurred effect by spreading out the shadow. So we see an example of the code here. So we see the syntax. We set the RGBs 181, 211, 181. That's setting the shadow color. Then they've also got the opacity setting. In here we've got the horizontal offset. Down here we've got the horizontal, the vertical offset. The blur size is 25 pixels. Any block element can be shadowed. Use the box shadow property. Okay, we still have the same settings there: the offset, X, Y, the color, the blur. You can add multiple colors or multiple shadows by using a comma separated list. As we see here, and we see the output. Okay, so we've added a drop shadow. This gives your page depth. By using this, as you see, it makes it to where it doesn't look like it's sitting right on top of the background. By using the shadow, it gives it the feel and the visual look that this section here has some depth from being touched back here. A color gradient is where one color gradually blends into another color, or it fades away into a transparent color if they're used. If you use transparent color, it's just going to look like it's just faded off. And it can also be used to modify background color. A linear gradient, the background color is going to transition from a starting color to an ending color along a straight line. And our default directionals for that is either vertical, starting from the top and moving to the bottom. We look at applying a color gradient. So we do have degrees that you set for this. All right, so when you set a gradient, colors are going to be evenly distributed. So we're looking at the one here. It starts at a solid red and a solid green appears halfway through and finishes with a solid blue. So we decide background, and we'll set the property of linear gradient. We set the degrees. It's going to happen at a 345-degree angle. We have our initial color, our final color, and then the last one is the background is dark green from 80% to the end. So how long do we want this color to be there? Let me see if they give you an example on this. So looking at an example of a gradient, we see here in this project, we start off with a lighter gray, and then we're going to wind up with a darker gray. How the color fades from one to the other. Let me pull up the CSS on this one. And we see here we set to a linear gradient, and it's set to bottom. Colors are set there, so it's going to fade from one to the other from gray to a darker gray. All right, radial gradient, the color gradient starts from a central point, and then there's going to proceed outwards. And it's in a series of circles or ellipses. So we create these using the following. We get the radial gradient function. In there, we do the radial gradient. We set the size of the position, color stop 1, color stop 2. We'll look at these. What these mean is the shape defines the shape of the gradient. Position defines where the gradient radiates from. Color stop 1, 2 is going to specify the colors at their stopping points. The size value of this is going to define the extent of the gradient that it radiates outward. You're going to use one of the CSS units of measure. It can be expressed as a percentage of the background's width and height. And you can also use one of the keywords, farthest corner, that's going to be your default, farthest side, closest corner, closest side. So we see an example of code here. We've got the background radial gradient, because the color at the center is going to be white. Color in the middle is going to be this RGB value, and then our outside color. You can also, once you have a gradient design, you can repeat it to the repeating linear gradients, and then the repeating radial gradients. And the parameters here, those are the parameters of the linear gradient or radial gradient functions. You can create semi-transparent objects by changing the opacity. All right, so in this case here, we've got the opacity property set to 0.55. So we're going to make this to where it's semi-transparent. You can use the transform effects parameters. This is your syntax for rotating, rescaling, and translation to space. This is how you can transform the appearance of a page object. The effect is the transformation function that you will apply to the page objects, while the parameters are going to specify the parameters required by the transformation function. So looking at some of these we have here. Okay, we have translate, offset X, or off X, off Y. That moves the object off the X pixels to the right and off the X pixels, off the Y pixels down. Negative value is going to move them left and up. Some of these scales let you scale X, Y, let you resize the objects. Scale X is going to let you rescale it on the X horizontally. Y will let you do it on the vertically, on the Y horizontally. Skew will let you skew the object. Rotate will allow you to rotate the angle by the degree. Clockwise, negative values will go counterclockwise. So we see here we've got this rotates the box 40 degrees counterclockwise. So we're putting the transform, rotate -40. We're going to also reduce the box size to 80% of its original size. So we're scaling it. And then we translate it. It moves the box 20 pixels to the right and 100 pixels up. 3D transformations change involves 3 axes. Your x-axis runs horizontally across the page. Y is going to run vertically. The z-axis goes straight out of the page and towards and away from the viewer. So we could change these by using the translate, off x, off y, and we just add the off z. So the same commands we had on the translate transformations earlier. Now we're just going to add the z in here. Notice on the scale, we do put scale 3D. Perspective is a measure of how rapidly objects appear to recede from the viewer in 3D space. Now you only use this when one object needs to be transformed in the 3D space. The example it gives here is looking at 2 sets of railroad tracks. Eventually they're going to look like they're going to converge into one track. That's going to be called the vanishing point. When you set this, you set the perspective and the value. The value is going to be a positive value that measures the strength of the perspective effect. Lower values result in more extreme distortion. So we see here that we got the perspective set at 600 pixels. You also have CSS filters. This is just how a browser will render an image, background or border. Filters modify the object's color, brightness, contrast, general appearance. These are originally introduced as a WebKit browser extension. And we see we apply these as filter. The effects is whatever filter you're going to use. And then the parameters of the parameters of the filter function. So we see some examples here. I'm not going to go through all these, but for example, the invert value, it's going to invert the color from 0, which leaves the image unchanged, up to 1, which completely inverts the colors. And you can invert along the way. Blur length applies a blur to the image where length defines the size of the blur in the pixels. So looking at some code here, we got our WebKit filter. And then we have our value set. And then we have our filter. And we have the same value set here. All right, image maps is when you take an image, an inline image, and you're making it a hyperlink. You're taking it and you're breaking it up. You're making like little hotspots. They're different little zones. Hotspots can be linked to different URLs. All right, so image maps are going to be supported by HTML. You have a client-side image map. It's an image match defined within a web page. It's handled entirely by the web browser. Server-side image maps are image maps that rely on a program running on the web server to create and administer the map. When you're defining a client-side image map, so you have the map equals name, or map name equals text, hotspots, and then the closing map tag. The text that's listed here is going to be the name of the image map. Hotspots are going to be defined as regions within the image that are linked to different URLs. Now you can place these within the body of a web page. They're not actually going to be displayed by the browser. They're going to be referenced for a mapping location of the hotspots within the image. And the most common practice is place a map element below the corresponding image. You can define the hotspot within the map element. Use the area shape and then shape coordinates is equal to coordinates, then our link and our alt text. So we look at this, we see the shapes with the shape of the hotspot region. Coordinates are going to be the list of points that define the boundaries of that region. The URL is where is the hypertext links taking us. And the text is the alternate text we displayed for non-graphical browsers, or if the image just doesn't load. So we see an example here of the code for this. So we have our shape set to rectangles. We have our coordinates, that's the coordinates of the rectangular hotspot. We have our URL for the hotspot link, and then our alternate text for this as well. You also see here that we have our name as a family map. All right, so when you apply an image map, you have the use map attribute to the image element. So we see here we placed our image, we have the alt text, and then we're saying use map, and then we're telling it to use the name of the map. That's the map here. This text here is the name assigned to the image map. So in this case, it would be family_map. All right, so that's the end of chapter 4. If you have any questions, send me an email.